Let's start with the title, because I actually love talking about titles. I think they're often like so full of information about a book, and they're like the first thing you see before you start reading one. So yeah, first of all, Babel or Babel, I've heard people say boast. I don't know, I say Babel, but I guess that the English word babble, like the verb to babble, comes from the biblical tower. But does that mean that the biblical tower was pronounced that way? I don't know. Maybe there's a definitive answer somewhere online, but I'm going with Babel because that is what the audiobook guy said. For those who don't know the story of Babel, it's great. It's basically a bunch of people decide to build a tower that will reach all the way to the heavens. And, because of their hubris, God curses them with language. I think he destroys the tower and he spreads out all the people and he gives them languages so that they can't communicate. I always felt like God comes across as a bit defensive and threatened in this story, like, the humans, they're communicating too much, they're working together as a team, better throw some discord in there so they can't make any more of these big towers. Also, the obvious irony of that story is that languages are beautiful and diversity is fantastic, so it's like, thanks for the curse, I guess. So straight off the bat, we know this is going to be about language. Maybe there's going to be some human hubris, maybe there's going to be a huge tower, maybe there's going to be the wrath of God. We're not sure yet, but it's good vibes so far. But we're not done with the title yet because it has an extra title built into it, in the same way that a lot of older books in the 1800s did, like Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, right? It's like a lot of writers used to have this feeling, I guess, that you needed to stick in an extra title in case people didn't like the first one. But yeah, by using that style, Kuang is giving these archaic vibes, right? Like she's giving us 1800s, which is telling us something about the book and when it's set. So it's actually called Babel or the Necessity of Violence, and there's a lot to say about that particular phrase, but I'm going to park it now because that's the themes basically, and we get into it. It certainly adds a lot of color and intrigue compared to just naming your book Babel. And you know what, we're still not done with the title because there's actually a subtitle here, almost as though it's an academic essay. I wonder why. And the subtitle is An Arcane History of the Oxford Translator's Revolution. Right? So we're getting, compared to the abstract nature of the necessity of violence, we're getting something hyper-specific and historical, right? Instead of something philosophical, we're getting an event that happened in history, which sounds like it didn't actually happen in history, right? It sounds like we're reading an alternative history. And the idea of translators having a revolution is itself quite fantastical, which, adds that fantasy element in what's starting to sound like it could actually be just a dry academic text. This kind of breathes a bit more life into it. So the full title is Babel or the Necessity of Violence, an Arcane History of the Oxford Translator's Revolution. I love the amount of information and suggestion that is packed into that title. I say packed in, it sounds strange because it's a long title, but it really carries quite a lot of conceptual weight to it. But I'm glad we just call it Babel. Nobody needs to remember all that. Babel is usually described as a dark academia epic fantasy. I don't think it's an epic actually, but we can get into that. It begins with a young boy being taken from his home in Hong Kong to the United Kingdom in the early 1800s, I think, and it follows him and his friends going to Oxford and training in language. The reason why the British Empire is interested in bringing young people from other countries to be raised as British subjects and to train in language and in translation is because in this version of reality, the British Empire is maintained through its control of silver, which is magic in this world. And the way the magic system works is basically through the act of translation. The magic system is, in my opinion, the best part about this book. I think it's ingenious how Kuang manages to tie empire to linguistics via magic. The way it works is they manufacture bars of silver and then inscribe a word on one side and its translation into another language on the other side. And basically, something is always lost in translation, right? And whatever is lost in the translation from the first word to the second word becomes manifested in some way. So for example, here's some that I invented myself, because of course I did. Anybody who knows a little bit about another language and who reads this book and vibes with it is probably going to try and invent their own match pairs. They're called match pairs, right? So let's say I have my silver bar and I write genki on one side in Japanese, and then I translate that as fine or well in English. Because in the way that we say, how are you? I'm fine in English, Japanese people say genki, genki. But the thing is, genki doesn't actually just mean fine. Really, it means sort of vivacious and full of energy and life and animated. I think animated is maybe one of the closest words in English. So if you put this silver bar into a fire, for example, I imagine the fire would become more animated, right? Or maybe wind would become stronger, or waves would become bigger, or something like that. It would imbue something with a little bit of life. The magic is always sort of low key. In this case, I don't think that the silver would be able to animate the dead, right? It only animates things that could already be animated naturally. That's how it seems to work in Kuang's world. Although no one is ever exactly sure what effect a silver bar will have unless it's been tried and tested, which is why the scholars in Oxford are working on it in their language institute, which is in a tower, which the students nickname Babel. Haha. So let's go the other way now. Like, let's say I wrote something in English and then translated it into Japanese, like the English word brilliant translated on the other side into subarashi. So what's missing is the sense of illumination, right, and light, which comes from brilliant. So I imagine this bar could be used to make lights shine brighter. Then let's say we had a match pair between the Spanish word aguantar and the English word wait. Right? So then I think what's lost in translation there is the sense of endurance that the Spanish word has. So this bar would give people the power to endure more or longer in some way. So maybe useful in the bedroom. I mean, people would definitely use magic for this stuff, right? But I think also could potentially be used by militaries to make their soldiers fight when they're wounded, or like go on longer treks and stuff like that, if they had a bar of this stuff in their backpack. Kuang really emphasizes how the magic in this world is used to support things, right? Rather than to just like create new things out of the blue, or like make things disappear or explode or whatever. And so we see how people in the British Empire use the silver bars for like daily luxuries, like to make their gardens grow a bit better and you make their tea a bit warmer and stuff like that. But also how the bars can enhance and support like crucial infrastructure, right? Like it can make wheels turn faster, it can make boats less likely to sink, it can make guns shoot their bullets further. And I don't know, I found this magic system so refreshing to read about and fun to think about. And also, like, crucially, it's not just interesting in and of itself, but it sort of supports the main kind of theme or metaphor maybe in the book, which is that, I'm not sure if it's the main one, but it's like one of the big ones, that empires extract, raw materials from different parts of the world and rely on the labor of people from those parts of the world as well. And with that, they can fuel their sort of dominance and their war machine, which allows them to sort of like enjoy the luxuries that those other countries can't. So it's basically like explaining colonialism through magic, which sounds like it could be a little patronizing, or almost like, why do you need the magic there if that's what the world is like anyways, right? But I think Kuang really pulls it off. I think it helps also that this is like a YA novel. I mean, obviously adults can enjoy it. I enjoyed it. But I think the key audience for this is probably teenagers. I do have one problem with the magic system in this book, which is the inconsistency, because there are some things which just don't really make sense to me. For example, at one point we find out that there are telescopes on the roof of Babel, and we get a little footnote to explain why they're there. Apparently the scholars were trying to create match pairs using the star signs, but none of it worked because astrology is a load of hocus pocus. So maybe I didn't quite understand this, but it seemed to me so strange that people would need to look at the stars in order to know their names, right? Like, you don't understand a constellation by seeing it, you understand it by somebody explaining it to you or reading it in a book or something. But the much more important question I had at that point was, why does astrology, being a legitimate science or not, affect the power of the words it uses? Like, it just seems so obvious that words can be incredibly powerful regardless of whether or not the things that they're describing are real or true, right? And I think Kuang recognizes this because at another part of the book, she says that some of the most unpredictable and dangerous words to be translated are religious words, and that the names of gods are not translated. It's like something you just don't do because the results can be so unpredictable and catastrophic and unharnessable, right? They're not useful for the empire. So it might seem like nitpicking, but this kind of thing happened for me a few times in the book. And of course, I just got to roll with it, and you go like, yeah, whatever, it's a story, it's a fantasy, right? But when those things start stacking up, then it can kind of kick you out of the world a little bit. And the problem is, Babel is quite a long book, and a lot of the information that I found kicking me out of the book didn't need to be there. For example, that footnote, right? That footnote, let's just talk about footnotes for a second, because this book is full of footnotes. And that one about the telescopes, obviously the intent of those things is to expand the world and make it more interesting by providing a little bit of detail that you wouldn't get like just in the normal flow of narrative. But instead, the detail about the telescopes and astrology that was added just made me question the world more. I think Kuang also chose to put the footnotes here to create this dark academia vibe. I've never read a dark academia book until this one, I should say. So like, in a way, like, I don't have the right context to describe this book in that way, but I think that the idea is to create a sort of scholarly impression in the same way that Borges does with his footnotes that he puts in, which are sometimes real and sometimes just like fantasy that he pulls out of his head. And it's a legitimate technique, and I like footnotes in general. I think footnotes can be used in a brilliant way, and I can see what Kuang was going for here. But in the case of the telescope and in some other cases, not only did the footnote kind of interrupt the flow of the narrative, right, like to take me out and to try and like create distance and, you know, sort of a bit of a scholarly distance, right, between me and the story, but it also like interrupted with a detail that made me question the whole world, that just made me like kind of feel like I was a bit kicked out of the world for a moment. So yeah, the footnotes are very intrusive. Also the tone of the voice of the footnotes, you know, the narrator, or the editor, I suppose, like the fantasy editor in this book, like it seems kind of a bit off, like it's a bit snobbish, a bit like kind of elitist, and like a bit dislikable, I found. But I don't know if that's meant to be like a character, or if it's meant, if it is just the voice of Kuang inserting herself into the book. So like just that sense of like, who are you? Am I meant to think of you as a character in this book, or are you just like kind of a voice that I don't get along with? I don't know. So yeah, the footnotes are intrusive, and that is especially true in the audiobook. I originally started reading this like in the actual like physical text that I took out multiple times from a library, and then when I moved to Malaysia, I couldn't get my hands on it anymore, so I found that it was in my audiobook library, and I moved on to that one. And the way they did this was that they had a second audiobook narrator reading the footnotes only, right? And like a main one for the rest of the book, and her voice was really commanding and strong, and that's, you know, that's great. But, and I don't know, maybe the volume was a tiny bit higher on her mic or something like that, but like it sounded even more like she was just interrupting the book, right? Like there's a guy telling you a story, and then suddenly somebody else jumps in and says the reason that the telescopes were there. So yeah, for me, I felt that the oral nature of the audiobook like just exacerbated the intrusiveness of the footnotes. And as for the main narrator, I have never ever had such a mixed experience like listening to an audiobook because of his vocal performance. Basically, he's like insanely good at doing character voices and sometimes abysmal at doing just normal narration. It's like he has a sort of narrator voice, and that narrator voice has a certain pattern that always continues, and the way that it continues is the way that I'm doing now. He just keeps raising his voice up and up, higher and higher, and then he finishes the sentence going down. And you know, like when that just keeps going on and on and on and on, every single sentence like that, oh my goodness, it was driving me. I nearly quit, right? I nearly quit the whole book because of that. But the flip side is that when he does character voices, they sound like real people, and every single character he does perfectly. Like he's thought about this character. Even like side characters who just appear for one page and they have like one word of dialogue, he gives them their own voice. And that was amazing for me, like to bother to give like such a distinct voice for every single one. Like this guy's a chameleon, he's amazing. So it's such a shame that the narrator's voice was, well actually, you know, sometimes the narrator's voice was really good because it was in the narration between chunks of dialogue. He just spoke kind of more like a normal person with normal rhythms. And I think it was like he kind of forgot to do his narrator voice, which made it infinitely better. Anyway, I got used to it. And like the character voices honestly like enhanced the whole experience for me. I had some trouble with the characters, which I'll talk about at the end of the video, but hearing their voices sort of unlocked them for me, especially Remy, which is Robin's best friend. Did I say the main character is called Robin Swift? If I didn't, then he's called Robin Swift. But yeah, a lot of the main characters in this book are focused on their own foreignness and what it means to be foreign in the British Empire and helping the British Empire achieve its aims. And so that's like an internal conflict for them. But when I heard especially Remy's voice, I heard he was like a posh Brit, and that made so much sense to me. I was just like, of course these kids are elitist snobs. They go to Oxford in the 1800s, okay? It's like, duh. I can feel sympathetic for them, and like, you know, when it comes to the cultural problem. But once I kind of understood that some of their more dislikable aspects are to do with class, then I don't know, I felt they made more sense to me as characters. And I think Kuang did write that into it, but it became clearer and like more interesting for me when I could actually hear the voices. There's just something so primitive and like instinctive when you hear a voice which is connected to privilege and wealth and elitism, you know? It's like, it just like kind of made something click in my brain, which made me go, oh, right, okay, yeah, you would be like that, wouldn't you? It just like enhances one of the most important nuances, I think, of these characters, which is this privilege that they have. And I don't know, like Kuang talks a lot about privilege and stuff, including like, you know, classism and stuff like that. But in a way I didn't feel it, and it's something that I think the book needed to lean into more for it to be better, basically. Let's talk a bit more about the vibes now and like what actually happens in this book, because I haven't given away much plot because there isn't much plot for the whole beginning of the book. For most of the book, I feel it sort of, you know, just suddenly explodes at the end, but like that's why the title is clever as well, because it says, you know, the translator's revolution, right, and the necessity of violence. So we've got, okay, violence, Tower of Babel, revolution, you know, like we've got a sense that something, you know, momentous and historic is going to happen, but then, you know, how are we going to get there? And for the beginning of the novel, it's not clear at all. So our main characters, Robin, Remy, Letty, and Victoire, are all like, you know, just living their student lives and worrying about exams and stuff like that. And this part of the book, which is like most of the book, I think, gave me real Harry Potter vibes. And maybe this is because I haven't read any other dark academia, but it felt like a lot of the, you know, the pleasure of reading the book is just the feeling of relaxing with these students while they do academic stuff and do make their way through a normal academic year, with some kind of vague mystery going on in the background, right? Like it really reminded me of Harry Potter quite a lot, even in some of the later bits when like the violence actually does break out. I mean, it's not a spoiler to say that it does because it's literally in the title. But yeah, like Harry Potter for kids who've now grown up out of Harry Potter and they're interested in things like anti-colonialism, you know, and like where does racism come from and all these kind of questions which you'd expect modern teenagers to be interested in, right? Like this feels like it was kind of written for them. And I'm all here for that, honestly. Although like, unfortunately, drawing the comparison to Harry Potter does make you see how it isn't as good in lots of ways. It isn't as taught, right? It, like I said, it feels kind of bloated because of all the footnotes and also like there's a sense of we know violence is coming, but we're not exactly sure how we're going to get there. And in the meantime, there isn't much mystery. There's a secret society, which we learned very early on, which is connected to sort of like these revolutionary anti-colonial ideas, right? And our main character, Robin, is torn between like, oh, how much do I want to be like kind of involved in these like illegal revolutionary things, and how much do I want to enjoy like the, you know, like the fruits of being an academic and the joy and the thrill of like seeking knowledge through books and like kind of the camaraderie of being at university together and being part of a cohort which is like interested in knowledge, gaining knowledge, but also like looking forward to creating knowledge in the future. Like I think if I knew more dark academia stuff, this would be more interesting, because it seems to me that this subgenre is all about romanticizing a sort of gothic version of the academic experience, which doesn't sound attractive to me really at all. Maybe just because I've lived too much of that academic experience to see it as romantic anymore. When I hear like the words dark academia, I don't think dark as in, you know, like a big mantelpiece with a skull on it and a stuffed raven and, you know, staying in a library until like past midnight with candles burning all around you and creating like, I don't know, that kind of witchy feeling of having lots of books around. I don't think of that kind of dark, right? I think about like some of the performativity of academia, when there's so much hollowness underneath it all. I think about like people being exploited, both students and staff, for their labor in ways. And I think of the sort of the business aspect of the university system, and there's all sorts of things, right? And to Kuang's credit, I think she manages to get a lot of that cynical view of academia as well, to contrast against the romanticized version. And that is kind of the struggle of her main character, Robin, that he is so in love with the romantic vision of Oxford and the life that he has there. But at the same time, he sees this sort of like Foucault-derived vision of knowledge as power. He sees like how the university is like fundamental to the workings of empire. And that makes academics, including him and his friends who are having a nice time together, eating scones and doing their homework, complicit in colonialism itself. So yeah, that kind of like soul-searching, the identity crisis that Robin is basically having for all of the book. There's a doppelganger motif in there, which was very much appreciated. But yeah, like that is what creates the intrigue, the tension, the darkness, I suppose. Whereas, you know, what's actually happening is they're just hanging out at school for most of the thing, which is fine, but it's an extremely slow pace. And then when we get to the end, where the violence happens, where we get this the long-awaited translator's revolution, for me, it just doesn't gel well enough with what came before. Like the transition from a low-stakes university story to a high-stakes revolutionary story just felt quite uneven. A lot of the dramatic events which were necessary to make that change felt very unlikely, unreal to me, quite convenient actually. Not necessarily convenient for the characters, because sometimes like really terrible things happen to the characters, right? Like unexpected bad things happen to the characters at the end, but they were convenient for the plot because then they allow things to escalate, right? And that plot convenience did make the latter part of the book much less satisfying for me. That said, it did feel very satisfying to read about, revolutionary activity in Imperial Britain at that time. I almost like leftist wish fulfillment, right? Like seeing some sort of resistance to empire at a time when empire is at its strongest, and like quite, I won't spoil it, but quite impactful resistance, let's say. I feel like when Rebecca Kuang is writing about silver and this world and the impact of silver on the world and how it can be used and not used, that's when she's at her best, and it's just fascinating to read. And the world that she's built is so amazing that I almost feel that it's wasted on the story that she's written and the characters that populate it. For example, there's this really poor use, in my opinion, of the Chekhov's gun kind of technique, where Chekhov says if a gun appears in the first act, it has to be shot in the third act or something like that, which translates in this case as a character saying at some point at the beginning, you must never use this silver match pair because blah blah blah, which makes us think, okay, so before the end of the book that silver match pair has to be used, right? And then when it does happen, it's not particularly exciting because it's something that in the back of our minds we've known is coming. There were also some problems that came up for the characters which didn't feel like real problems. They just felt like vehicles to make the characters at odds with each other, with one side being more like, no, we need to be more radical, we need to take the more revolutionary option, and risk maybe hurting civilians or so on. And then the other side saying like, no, that's crossing a line, you don't want to push violence too far, we need to keep our morals, we need to stay good people, and so on, right? Which is an interesting, discussion, which is obviously important, which is why the book has got the subtitle, alternative title, or the necessity of violence, right? This is sort of like Frantz Fanon, right? Frantz Fanon plus Foucault, but put in a Harry Potter world, right? I don't know, it's genius actually. But the problem was that interesting conversation was built on a problem which I didn't feel really existed. I won't go into spoilers, I won't say what they were talking about exactly, but it just seemed like it wasn't a problem at all. And this could probably all be forgiven if the characters who are having these kinds of conversations were really fascinating and were just fun to be around. And I think they are for a lot of people. I just searched this on TikTok. I don't have TikTok, but I searched Babel on TikTok, and I saw a bunch of young Malaysian people talking about this book and making little videos and creating kind of vibe reels where you have pictures and anime versions of the characters and stuff like that. And the impression that I got was just that a lot of people love the characters and that they're really invested in the characters and the tensions and the intergroup dynamics and stuff like that. And I didn't feel that at all. Robin's character is the most interesting, which you'd hope because he's the main character of the book, but he's got, like I mentioned, this uncertain position, and he's mixed race, so he's kind of in these two different camps. His name is one that he chose for himself, and the last name Swift comes from Jonathan Swift, and because he used to like reading Gulliver's Travels. And there's a really nice bit at the end where he references the Houyhnhnms from that book and what it means to be foreign, and that connection to an earlier text. I thought that intertextuality, if you will, was done really well and made his character more interesting for it. But yeah, he's struggling with this dual identity for a lot of the book, and then at one point he basically seems to choose a side, which seemed so strange for me and not true to his character. And then by the end, it made sense to me. So maybe I just wasn't being perceptive enough. But there was a whole chunk of the book where I felt very alienated from him because I just thought he's not acting the way that he normally acts. But then by the end of it, it sort of made sense. It just didn't seem in character for me, because usually people who spend a lot of time thinking am I A or B or both or neither? They don't one day go, I'm this one, right? They don't just suddenly pick and then stick with that version of themselves without any more doubt. But it did make sense by the end. I think his character did have quite a satisfying arc in a way. It's just that there was a section of the book where maybe I wasn't being perceptive enough, but it didn't seem to make sense to me why he had settled apparently on one version of himself. Then if we consider the more colonialist characters, the ones who represent the British establishment in this, they were they really weakened the book for being just mustache twirling villains. And in a way I can believe it, right? If you from a modern audience perspective, if you look at the opinions of people who were in the British Empire, who believed in the empire at that time, and who were quite proudly racist in lots of ways. A lot of them probably would read like cartoonish villains to us now. But the problem is that this is a fiction, right? We need to believe in it in a way that we don't need to believe in history, if that makes sense. Like, I 100% believe that a lot of colonialist thinkers from that time, and even some today, right? They sound like two-dimensional villains when you put them in the modern context. But I think that when you write fiction, basically you just have to lie sometimes about how complex people are in order to sound convincing. Like, there was one footnote that I actually really liked about, like kind of the main colonialist guy who's called Professor Lovell in this. He's the one who brings Robin to the university when he's a child. In the footnote, he tells Robin to avoid church and not go to church. And if he has to because of his classes and so on, then he should, like, instead of praying, he shouldn't waste his time. He should just be practicing language in his head, because he, Lovell is an Enlightenment thinker, and he thinks religion is a load of superstitious nonsense. So that is really interesting because it completely fits his character, but at the same time it's a bit of characterization which is non-villainous, non-arch conservative, and even quite rebellious, telling Robin to not pray and not do what the teachers or the priests or whatever are telling him to do. So I wish there had just been more focus on this kind of nuanced characterization, right? Like, get rid of most of the footnotes, but things that do that, put them in the main text, both for the bad guys, but especially for the main group of friends, right? Like, this really rested on the main group of friends having a strong dynamic. Like I said, a lot of people felt it, but for me, the main friendship group just felt pretty flat, basically. Like, I enjoyed reading about them. Like, I never felt like bored reading about them just hanging out and being young and having fun together and, doing their homework and stuff. So it wasn't terrible, but at the same time, I didn't really care about any of them. And it's hard to say why exactly. I think it might have been because I didn't see their individuality come out so much in the way that they reacted to different situations. But yeah, I think I've summed up like my main thoughts here. Like, amazing world building and magic, and the whole concept and the way that the theme ties in with the sort of the fundamental magic system here, and the way that actually ties even to the characters and the plot to a lesser extent, but that all of that is very clever. It is the characters and the plot, though, in and of themselves, which I found lacking, and unfortunately that's usually like the heart of a story for a lot of readers, this one included. Like, no matter how amazing the themes are, if you don't feel that sort of emotional, personal connection, then it's not going to be like your favorite book ever. I want to end on a positive, though, because this was overall a really positive experience for me reading this book. When I picked the book up again on audiobook, I rewound a little bit because I'd just been to Singapore and I'd seen a bunch of museums there. And so like I was really interested, like fascinated by what I learned about British colonialism in East Asia. So I rewound to read a bit again about a voyage that happens in the book at one point where they go to Hong Kong. Also just because I love voyages in books. I don't know why. I love reading about characters on boats in fiction. It's just something which always works for me. It worked for me in this book as well. I wish it was longer. I wish it had lasted like half the book. But yeah, just learning about, the real life arrogance of the British in East Asia and like their feeling of superiority, but also the absolute importance of Asia to them. Like, I read about how after the Japanese kicked out the Brits, apparently Winston Churchill was getting nightmares. Like, he couldn't sleep because of this idea that there were no more Westerners in East Asia. Like, the last of the Western powers, Britain, had fallen, and so there was no more like white people in this part of the world to have dominance over it. And that just seemed to him like one of the worst possible things that had happened in World War II. So yeah, this sort of paradox of British imperialists thinking of themselves as both above Asia and absolutely dependent on it was just really fascinating to read about in real life. And so then it made the book more like interesting and alive when I went back to it. It was also like really, really fascinating and enlightening to learn about the importance of silver, the raw material of silver. Although it seems that it wasn't really the UK that was sustaining itself through that, like in Kuang's book, but it was actually like Spain and China, because China wanted silver very badly at that time, right? Like, in fact, a bit earlier, I think, than when Babel is set. And Spain had, of course, its colonies in the New World. So what Spain did was it had a trade route where it would go to Latin America, extract the silver from there, bring that by sea to places like Singapore and Malaysia, and then trade with the Chinese who came down, who wanted the silver, and the Chinese would bring them the sort of Asian things, right? Like spices and silks and all these things that Europe desperately wanted. So basically it was like an alternative to the Silk Road. And this route, right, which went like China, East Asia, Latin America, and then Europe, that was like kind of what sustained the Spanish Empire for hundreds of years. So yeah, like absolutely fascinating stuff. And I'm so glad that there is a fantasy book which is very popular, especially amongst young people, which, you know, talks about these things in a way that makes them engaging and exciting and thrilling and like kind of fun to think about and chat with your friends and come up with the magic match pairs with the silver and using language and stuff like that. So I'm so like grateful that Babel exists in a way. Like I do wish like I'd liked it more. It's strange, isn't it? It's strange having a book that you're like, you appreciate so much while at the same time not actually having read it really. And I'm, you know, her new book, Catabasis, again, what's with these titles, Rebecca? It's like, can't we get something that everybody can say easily? Yeah, this new book of hers that just came out doesn't, like I read the back of it, but it doesn't sound that interesting to me. It's about the underworld and again, it's dark academia and stuff, but I didn't see anything immediately that seemed as thrilling as the concept of silver that she created for this world. I'd almost want like Babel 2 or something like that. I'd be interested in reading a Babel 2, although, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, it's getting dark, so that's a sign that it's time to end the video. Let me know your thoughts on Babel down below, or Babel, or Babel Babble. Put all the babbling down below in the comments and we'll babble together for a bit. And I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.